The smoke alarm screamed at 2:17 in the morning. Evelyn grabbed her newborn twins from the crib. Her heart pounded. Smoke poured under the door. She ran to escape, but every door was locked. From the outside. Through the window, she saw her husband's car pulling away. His headlights swept across the lawn. He never looked back. Her own husband had locked her inside a burning house, with their 2-week-old babies. But Evelyn refused to die. She smashed the window with her bare hands, jumped from the second floor with her twins clutched to her chest. Her ankle shattered on impact. Her hands burned raw. She survived. Her babies survived. And then she discovered something that changed everything. Her husband's mistress had helped plan the fire, but that wasn't the worst part. The truth Evelyn uncovered didn't just send her husband to prison. It destroyed him completely. His money, his family, his freedom, his name, everything he tried to take from her, she took from him. Times 10. This is her story. Lesson and value. This story carries a powerful message. The fault always lies with the person who chose to deceive, never with the person who chose to love. Your trust is a gift. If someone betrays that gift, the shame belongs to them, not to you. And remember this, you are always stronger than they want you to believe. Sometimes it takes a fire to discover just how strong you really are. The smoke alarm shrieked at 2:17 in the morning, and Evelyn's first thought was the twins. She jerked awake in the nursery rocking chair. Her neck ached from the awkward angle. The 2 a.m. feeding had knocked her out cold. But now smoke curled through the doorway, like gray fingers reaching for her babies. Evie launched herself toward the crib. James was already fussing. Lily slept on, oblivious. She scooped them both up, one in each arm. Her C-section incisions screamed in protest. 2 weeks postpartum, and her body still felt like it belonged to someone else. The smoke thickened. Orange light flickered from somewhere downstairs. She ran to the master bedroom. The bed was empty. Marcus's side hadn't been slept in. The sheets were cold and smooth. Where was he? The bedroom door to the hallway wouldn't budge. She slammed her shoulder against it. Nothing. The wood didn't even rattle. Something was holding it shut from the other side. Evie shifted both babies to one arm. They weighed barely 12 pounds together, but her exhausted muscles trembled. She twisted the doorknob again, pulled, pushed. The door held fast. She ran to the back staircase, the servants' stairs that led to the kitchen. This door wouldn't open either. That was when she saw it. Through the gap at the bottom of the door frame, a shadow, a straight line that shouldn't be there, a bolt, a shiny new bolt she had never seen before, installed on the outside of the door. Her blood turned to ice water. She checked her phone. No signal. Checked again. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock. The screen mocked her with its useless brightness. The smoke was getting thicker. James started crying. Then Lily joined him. Their newborn wails cut through the smoke alarm's scream. Evie ran to the window, the one overlooking the front yard. She pressed her face to the glass and saw something that stopped her heart. Marcus's silver BMW. Pulling out of the driveway, his headlights swept across the lawn as he turned onto the street. He didn't look back. Not once. The understanding crashed over her like a wave of black water. The bolts, the fire, her husband driving away while his family burned. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. Her hand shook so badly, she almost dropped James. She clutched both babies tighter against her chest. Their crying filled her ears. Their tiny bodies were so warm, so alive, so dependent on her to keep them that way. Think, think, think. The window. She had to break the window. Evie grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the nightstand. She smashed it against the glass, once, twice. On the third strike, the window shattered outward. Glass rained down onto the lawn below. Cold February air rushed in, temporarily clearing the smoke. She looked down. Second floor, maybe 15 feet to the ground. Decorative boxwood hedges directly below. The fire was climbing the stairs now. She could hear it, a hungry roaring sound. The smoke poured through every crack and gap. She had maybe 90 seconds. Evie stripped the blanket from the bed, wrapped it around both babies as tightly as she could. She climbed onto the windowsill. Her bare feet crunched on broken glass. She didn't feel the cuts. She jumped. The fall lasted forever, and no time at all. She twisted in midair, pulled the babies against her stomach, landed on her back in the bushes. Branches snapped beneath her. Something in her ankle cracked, with a sound like a gunshot. The pain was extraordinary, white-hot, and absolute. But James and Lily were crying. Crying meant breathing. Crying meant alive. Evie rolled off the bushes onto the frozen grass. She couldn't stand. Her ankle was wrong, twisted at an angle that made her stomach lurch. So she crawled. She crawled across the lawn with her babies clutched to her chest. Behind her, the house groaned. A window exploded outward. Flames shot toward the sky. A door slammed somewhere nearby. Old Mr. Patterson from next door came running across the lawn in his bathrobe. His face was pale in the firelight. He was saying something, but Evie couldn't hear him over the roaring. Sirens in the distance, getting closer. She made it to the edge of the property before her arms gave out. She lay on the frozen ground with her children on her chest, staring up at the burning house she had called home for 6 years. The nursery window glowed orange. The rocking chair where she had fallen asleep was probably ash by now. James stopped crying. He looked up at her with those dark eyes that were so like his father's. She would never be able to look at those eyes without remembering this moment. The fire trucks arrived. Paramedics surrounded her. Someone tried to take the babies. She wouldn't let go. They had to pry her fingers open one by one. A paramedic shined a light in her eyes. She heard words: shock, burns, broken ankle. She answered questions she wouldn't remember later. All she could think about was the silver BMW driving away. The headlights sweeping across the lawn, the man behind the wheel who had left his family to die, Marcus, her husband, the father of her children. He had locked them inside. He had set the fire. He had driven away. The truth was so enormous that her mind kept sliding off it, kept trying to find another explanation, a mistake, a misunderstanding, anything but this. But she had seen the bolt, the shiny new bolt that someone had installed on the outside of the door, and she had seen his car, driving away while smoke poured from the windows. There was no misunderstanding. Her husband had just tried to murder her and her newborn twins. The paramedic was saying something about the hospital, about emergency treatment for her burns. She looked down at her hands for the first time. They were red and blistered, charred in some places. She hadn't even felt it. She had felt nothing except the need to get her babies out. Now, lying on a stretcher, while strangers strapped her down, she started to feel everything: the burns, the broken ankle, the glass cuts on her feet, the devastation of a 6-year marriage ending in attempted murder. The tears came, hot and silent, rolling down her smoke-blackened cheeks. But even as she cried, something cold and hard was forming in her chest, a kernel of ice where her love for Marcus used to be. He had tried to kill her. He had tried to kill their children, and she had no idea why. The ambulance doors closed. The sirens started again. She watched through the small back window as her home collapsed in on itself. A fountain of sparks shot toward the stars. Everything she owned was burning. Her wedding photos, her grandmother's china, the nursery furniture she had spent months choosing. But her babies were alive. Crying in the arms of the paramedics, alive and unharmed, she had saved them. Not Marcus, not the firefighters, her. She had woken up. She had grabbed them. She had jumped from a second-story window with a 2-week-old C-section incision, and she had survived. Whatever came next, she would face it with that knowledge. She was stronger than she had ever known, stronger than Marcus had ever suspected. He had underestimated her, fatally. The ambulance pulled away. Behind them, the fire trucks sprayed water on the ruins of her marriage. Evelyn closed her eyes. Let the paramedics work on her burns. Let the pain medication start its slow crawl through her veins. She wasn't done yet, not even close. This was just the beginning. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and institutional coffee. Evie's hands were wrapped in white gauze that made them look like boxing gloves. Her ankle throbbed in its cast. The morphine drip took the edge off, but nothing could touch the pain in her chest. James and Lily slept in a NICU bassinet beside her bed. The nurses had cleared them of smoke inhalation. Perfect APGAR scores, healthy lungs. They had no idea how close they had come to dying before their lives really began. Evie stared at the ceiling tiles, counted the little holes in each one, tried to make her brain work through the fog of painkillers and shock. The door opened. A man in a rumpled suit entered. Late 40s, kind eyes, and a tired face. He said, "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Detective Samuel Whitmore. Mind if I ask you some questions?" It wasn't really a question. She could tell. She said, "Yes." He pulled a plastic chair closer to her bed. The legs scraped against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. He said, "The fire marshal has made some preliminary findings. I need to share them with you." She waited. He pulled out a folder, opened it to reveal photographs, close-ups of door frames, metal hardware gleaming in harsh flash photography. He said, "These are exterior deadbolts, 3 of them, recently installed on the doors leading from the second-floor master suite to the rest of the house." She looked at the photos. The bolts were new. The brass hadn't even started to tarnish. She said, "I didn't know about those." He nodded, made a note in his little book. He said, "We also found evidence of accelerant. Gasoline, most likely. The fire originated in multiple locations on the first floor." She tried to swallow. Her throat was raw from the smoke. She said, "Detective, my husband wasn't in the house when the fire started." He looked up from his notebook. She said, "I saw his car, leaving the driveway, right before I jumped from the window." The silence stretched between them. The only sound was the soft beeping of monitors and the twins' quiet breathing. He said, "What time was that?" She said, "Around 2:15, maybe 2:20. The smoke alarm woke me up." He made another note. He said, "Your husband told the responding officers he was at a business dinner, claims he didn't hear about the fire until 3:45 a.m. when his father called him." She felt something cold move through her, a fish swimming in dark water. She said, "He's lying." He didn't react, just kept writing. He said, "We're checking his alibi now. Is there anything else you can tell me about that night?" She closed her eyes, tried to remember through the haze of trauma and medication. She said, "He insisted I sleep in the nursery. Said I needed to be close to the twins for the night feedings. He said he would sleep in the master bedroom so my moving around wouldn't wake him." She paused. She said, "He kissed me goodnight around 10. Said he had some work to finish in his office downstairs. That's the last time I saw him until she saw his taillights disappearing down the street." The detective asked a few more questions, times, routines, whether she had noticed anything unusual in the days before the fire. She told him about the life insurance policy, the $2.5 million policy Marcus had pushed her to sign 6 months ago. He said, "That's a substantial policy." She said, "He told me it was standard, that any responsible father would have one." She heard how naive that sounded, how trusting. The detective left, said he would be in touch, said she should rest. Rest. As if that were possible. She lay there staring at the ceiling, counting those tiny holes, trying to make sense of a world that had stopped making sense at 2:17 in the morning. The door opened again. Marcus rushed in. His face was arranged in an expression of devastation. His expensive suit was rumpled. His hair was artfully disheveled. He said, "Oh God, Evie, I just heard. Are you okay? Are the babies okay?" He reached for her bandaged hands. She pulled them back, watched his face register the rejection, watched him recalibrate. He said, "I was at a work dinner. Had my phone on silent. I didn't get the calls until 3:30. I came straight here." She said nothing. He said, "Thank God you got out. Thank God you saved the twins. I can't believe this happened. It must have been electrical. That old wiring. I kept saying we needed to upgrade." His words washed over her like noise. She studied his face, looking for something real beneath the performance. He moved closer, tried to touch her cheek. She turned away. He said, "Evie, what's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that?" She kept her voice flat. She said, "The doors were locked. From the outside." His face went still for just a moment, a flicker of something dark behind his eyes. Then the mask was back. He said, "What? That's impossible. Who would do that?" She didn't answer. He said, "You must be confused. It was traumatic. You were in shock. Maybe the doors were just stuck." His voice was so reasonable, so concerned. She had believed that voice for 6 years. She said, "The detective showed me photos, new deadbolts, installed on the outside of every door." Another flicker. He covered it with outrage. He said, "That's insane. Someone must have broken in. A burglar, someone trying to rob us." She said, "A burglar who installs locks." He had no answer for that. She watched him scramble, watched the gears turn behind his eyes. He said, "This is crazy. You're accusing me of something, I can tell. But Evie, I love you. I would never hurt you or the babies." She remembered his vows, on their wedding day, the flowers, the champagne, his voice trembling with emotion as he promised to protect her with his life. She had believed every word, built her whole life on those words, and they had meant nothing, just pretty sounds from a hollow man. He said, "Say something, please. You're scaring me." She looked at him, really looked, at the face she had loved, the father of her children, the man she had trusted completely. She said, "I saw your car, driving away, while the house was burning." The mask cracked. For just a second, she saw the real Marcus beneath. Cold, calculating, furious that his plan had failed. Then it was gone, replaced by wounded innocence. He said, "That's not possible. I wasn't there. Evie, the trauma is making you imagine things. This is very common. Post-traumatic stress." She turned her head away. She said, "I think you should leave." He stood there for a long moment. She could feel his eyes on her, feel him deciding what to do, whether to push harder or retreat. He said, "I'll come back when you've had some rest, when you're thinking clearly." His footsteps retreated. The door closed with a soft click. Evie lay there in the silence. The twins made small sounds in their sleep, healthy sounds, alive sounds. The door opened again. She tensed. But it was her mother. Cordelia Mercer had the face of a woman who had sentenced criminals to prison for 30 years, steel spine, ice in her veins. But her eyes were red. She sat on the edge of the bed, took Evie's bandaged hand as gently as if it were made of spun glass. She said, "Tell me everything. Leave nothing out." So Evie did. From the smoke alarm to the locked doors, from the shattering window to the silver BMW driving away, from the detective's photographs to Marcus's performance just now. Her mother listened without interrupting. Her face grew harder with every word. When Evie finished, Cordelia was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "That man tried to murder my daughter and my grandchildren." It wasn't a question. Evie said, "I think so. Yes." Her mother stood, smoothed her slacks, checked her phone. She said, "I've already called the best divorce attorney in the state. She's on her way." She paused at the door. She said, "He will pay for this. I promise you that." Then she was gone. Evie looked at the twins, their perfect faces, their tiny fingers curled in sleep. She said to no one, "I'm not crazy." The doors were bolted. From the outside, someone locked us in. The validation whisper hung in the empty room, a truth she needed to hear herself say out loud. Whatever happened next, she would hold on to that truth, no matter how hard Marcus tried to twist it, no matter what lies he told. She had seen what she had seen, and she would make sure everyone else saw it too. 3 days after the fire, Evie was still in the hospital. Her burns were healing, but slowly. The doctors wanted to watch for infection. She didn't mind. The hospital felt safer than anywhere else. Detective Whitmore returned with a manila folder thick with papers. His face was carefully neutral, but something glittered in his eyes. He said, "Mrs. Hartwell, we've recovered some additional evidence." She waited. He opened the folder, pulled out a credit card receipt. He said, "This is from a gas station on Route 15, 3 miles from your home." She looked at the receipt, Marcus's name, his credit card number. The date jumped out at her. The night of the fire. He said, "Your husband purchased 15 gallons of gasoline at 8:47 p.m., about 5 hours before your house caught fire." The room tilted slightly. She gripped the bed rail with her bandaged hands. He said, "Mrs. Hartwell, your husband told us he was at a business dinner until midnight, but we have his credit card records showing him purchasing accelerant 3 hours before your house caught fire." She closed her eyes. The last fragile hope she had been holding on to crumbled to dust. Some stupid part of her had still wanted there to be another explanation, a misunderstanding, a mistake. But there was no misunderstanding 15 gallons of gasoline. She said, "What happens now?" He said, "We're building a case. Arson, attempted murder. The district attorney is reviewing the evidence." He paused. He said, "Is there anything else you can tell me? Anything that seemed strange in the weeks before the fire?" She thought about it. Really thought. Sifting through 6 years of memories for red flags she had missed. She said, "He was working late a lot for the past 6 months or so. Said he had a big development deal coming together." She said, "He got a phone call one night, about a month ago. Took it in his office with the door closed. When he came out, he was pale, shaking. He said it was nothing, a work emergency." She said, "He pushed me to update my life insurance. Said we needed more coverage now that we had the twins coming. I thought it was responsible." The detective wrote everything down. He said, "We're also looking into his business finances. The forensic accountants found some irregularities." She said, "What kind of irregularities?" He said, "I can't share the details yet, but you should prepare yourself. It's not good." He left her alone with her thoughts. Her mother arrived an hour later. With her was Josephine Brennan, Josie, her best friend since college, now one of the top divorce attorneys in the state. Josie looked different than Evie remembered, harder around the edges, like life had filed down her softness. But her hug was warm and fierce. She said, "I have been waiting years to destroy Marcus Hartwell. Finally got my chance. Evie almost smiled. Almost. Her mother said, Josephine has been doing some digging. Josie pulled out her own folder. This one was even thicker than the detective's. She said, brace yourself. She spread papers across the hospital bed. Bank statements, court records, business filings. She said, Marcus's real estate development company is a shell. Almost no actual properties. The projects he claimed to be working on don't exist. She pointed to a column of numbers. She said, he's been laundering money, taking investments from wealthy clients, moving it through fake property deals, pocketing most of it. Evie felt sick. The man she had married was a criminal. An actual criminal. Josie continued. She said, it gets worse. He has gambling debts, $800,000 owed to some very unpleasant people. She pulled out another document. She said, and the life insurance policy on you, $2.5 million. Beneficiary, listed as Marcus Hartwell. Payable on your death. Evie looked at the policy, her own signature at the bottom, signed 6 months ago, when she was newly pregnant, when she thought her husband was planning for their family's future. Instead, he had been planning her murder. Josie said, he was going to kill you for the insurance money. Pay off his debts. Start fresh. The words hung in the air, brutal and true. Evie felt something breaking inside her, something she had been holding together through sheer force of will. She remembered their wedding day, the white dress, the flowers, her father walking her down the aisle. He had died 2 years later, never knowing what kind of man he had given his daughter to. She remembered announcing her pregnancy, Marcus's smile, his tears, how he had held her and promised to be the best father in the world. All lies, every moment poisoned. Josie said, there's more. She pulled out a photograph, a woman, beautiful, dark hair, late 20s. She said, Delilah Vance, event planner. She met Marcus at the Preston Charity Gala 6 months ago. 6 months ago, when Evie had been on bed rest, when the doctor said the twins might not survive. Josie said, they've been having an affair ever since. Hotel receipts, love notes, photos. She spread the evidence across the bed. 6 months of betrayal in black and white. Evie picked up one of the photos. Marcus and Delilah at a restaurant, candles on the table. His hand on hers, they were laughing about something. She remembered that night. Marcus had said he was closing a deal with a difficult client. He had come home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. She had made a joke about sealing the deal. He had laughed. She had believed him. She had believed everything. Josie said, the detective got a warrant for their text messages. She handed Evie a printout, a conversation between Marcus and Delilah, dated 3 days before the fire. Delilah, when are you going to be free? Marcus, soon, I promise. Once the insurance comes through. Delilah, I'm tired of waiting. You said you'd handle this. Marcus, trust me, after Saturday, we'll never have to worry about money again. Saturday, the night of the fire. Evie read the words again. Once the insurance comes through, handle this. Never have to worry about money again. They had planned it together, her husband and his mistress, planned to burn her alive with her newborn children. She thought about all the times she had defended Marcus. To her mother, who never liked him, to her friends who whispered concerns, she had dismissed them all, believed in her marriage with everything she had, and he had been sleeping with another woman, planning her death, laughing about how stupid she was. Josie reached out, squeezed her shoulder. She said, I never liked him. Evie said, I know. Josie said, the way he looked at you sometimes, like you were a problem to solve, not a person to love. Evie thought about that. The small moments of coldness she had explained away, The times he made her feel crazy for asking questions. The way he could smile while lying to her face. She had spent 6 years making excuses for red flags, explaining away absences, filling silence with the sound of her own justifications. And now her children had almost paid the price for her blind faith. The tears came. She couldn't stop them. Didn't try. Josie held her. Let her cry. Didn't say anything stupid about it being okay, because it wasn't okay. It would never be okay. But when the tears finally stopped, something else remained. Anger, pure and clean and righteous. She said, "I want him destroyed." Josie smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. She said, "That's my girl." The deeper they dug, the worse it got. Evie was released from the hospital a week after the fire. She couldn't go back to the house. It was a crime scene now. Yellow tape and ash and memories she never wanted to revisit. Her mother's house became headquarters. Cordelia transformed the dining room into a war room. Evidence boards, timelines, photographs of Marcus and Delilah that made Evie's stomach turn. Josie arrived every day with new discoveries, each one worse than the last. She said, his business partner filed a civil suit 2 months ago, claiming Marcus embezzled $300,000 from their development fund. She said, he took out a second mortgage on your house, forged your signature on the documents, used the money to pay gambling debts. She said, the hotels where he took Delilah, he paid with your joint credit card. You've been funding his affair this whole time. Each revelation landed like a punch. Evie stopped flinching. There was only so much shock a body could absorb before it went numb. She focused on the twins instead, James and Lily. 2 weeks old and already survivors. They didn't know how close they had come to death. They just wanted milk and warmth and the sound of her heartbeat. She held them for hours, fed them, changed them, watched them sleep, and she planned. Detective Whitmore visited regularly. The case was building. The district attorney was confident. Multiple charges: arson, attempted murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy. He said, "We arrested the mistress this morning." Evie looked up sharply. He said, "Delilah Vance. She purchased the deadbolts. We have security footage from the hardware store, her credit card receipt. She knew exactly what those locks were for." Evie thought about that. The mistress buying the locks that would trap her inside a burning house, choosing the hardware, paying at the register, maybe smiling at the cashier, all while planning murder. She said, "What is she saying?" He said, "Nothing useful." Claims Marcus told her it was for security. Says she had no idea about the fire. He paused. He said, "We're offering her a deal. If she testifies against him, we'll reduce her charges." Evie felt something twist in her chest. She said, "You want to give her a deal?" He said, "We want to nail Marcus. He's the primary. She's just the accomplice." Just the accomplice. Just the woman who bought the locks. Just the one who pushed him to handle this. Just the reason he decided his family was disposable. Evie said, "I understand." But she didn't. Not really. Some betrayals cut too deep for understanding. That afternoon, Josie arrived with the final piece of evidence. She said, "We found his laptop, hidden in his office at the company. The forensic team recovered deleted files." She spread printouts across the war room table. She said, "He researched house fires for 3 months, how to make them look electrical, how accelerants spread, how to avoid leaving evidence." She said, "He searched for life insurance payout timelines, how long after death before the money is released." She said, "He looked up real estate in Costa Rica, a country with no extradition treaty." Evie stared at the search history, the timeline of her husband's murder plan, research conducted while she was pregnant, while she was on bed rest, while she was fighting to keep their babies alive. The last search was dated the morning of the fire. How long does a house fire take to kill someone sleeping? She couldn't look at it anymore. She left the room, walked into the backyard, stood in the cold February air, and breathed until she stopped shaking. Her mother followed, stood beside her without speaking. Finally, Evie said, "6 months ago, he was researching how to kill me, and I had no idea. I was lying in bed growing his children, and I had no idea." Her mother said nothing. There was nothing to say. Evie continued. She said, "The morning of the fire, I made him breakfast, eggs and toast, the way he likes it. He kissed me goodbye and said he loved me. And then he went to work and Googled how long it would take for fire to kill me." She laughed. It was not a happy sound. She said, "I feel so stupid." Her mother spoke then. Her voice was hard. She said, "You are not stupid. You trusted your husband. That's what wives do. The fault lies with him. Only with him." Evie wanted to believe that, but the shame kept pressing down. The stupid, useless shame of being fooled, of being loved by no one while believing herself beloved. She went back inside, back to the evidence spread across the dining table, forced herself to look at it, to see it clearly. She reorganized the papers, sorted them by date, lined them up perfectly, then messed them up and sorted them again. She needed something to do with her hands, something to keep her from screaming. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then she remembered that her whole life was unknown now. Strange numbers could mean anything. She answered. A woman's voice said, "Mrs. Hartwell?" Evie said, "Who is this?" The woman said, "My name is Charlotte Vance. I'm Delilah's mother." Evie's blood turned to ice. Charlotte said, "I know things about my daughter, things that could help you. She's done this before." Evie said, "What do you mean, done this before?" A long pause, the sound of ragged breathing. Charlotte said, "Her first husband, 8 years ago. He died in a house fire too." The interrogation room was small and gray. One-way glass covered most of one wall. Evie stood on the other side, invisible, watching. Delilah Vance looked perfect. Even in custody, she was beautiful. Dark hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. She sat with her hands folded on the table, the picture of innocent concern. Detective Whitmore sat across from her. His voice was patient, relentless. He said, "Tell me about the deadbolts." She said, "I already told you. Marcus asked me to pick them up. He said it was for security. There had been break-ins in the neighborhood." Her voice was honey and cream, reasonable, sincere. She said, "I had no idea what he was planning. I'm a victim in this too, Detective. He manipulated me. He told me his wife was abusive, mentally unstable, that she threatened to hurt the babies if he ever tried to leave." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. No actual tears fell. She said, "I believed him. I thought I was helping him escape a dangerous situation. I never imagined he would do something like this." Evie watched through the glass, her bandaged hands pressed against the cold surface. This woman had helped plan her murder, had pushed Marcus to handle this, had bought the locks that would have sealed her family's coffin, and now she was playing the victim. Detective Whitmore slid a photograph across the table. The security footage from the hardware store. Delilah smiling at the register, a bag of deadbolts in her hand. He said, "These are exterior deadbolts, designed to lock from the outside, not much good for keeping burglars out." Delilah's smile flickered, just for a second. She said, "I don't know much about hardware. Marcus just gave me a list." He said, "A list we'd very much like to see." She said, "I threw it away. I didn't think it was important." He nodded, made a note. He said, "Let's talk about the text messages." He spread printouts across the table. The conversation Evie had already seen. Once the insurance comes through, handle this. After Saturday. Delilah looked at the messages. Her face was perfectly calm. She said, "Insurance?" I assumed he meant a business deal. Marcus was always talking about money coming through. He said, on the night his wife and children almost burned to death. She said, "Coincidence. I had no idea what he was planning." He leaned forward. He said, "Ms. Vance, we have your phone records, your location data, your credit card receipts. We know you were with Marcus until 11:45 that night." She said nothing. He said, "His wife's house caught fire at 2:15. That gave him plenty of time to set everything up after you left." She said, "I don't know anything about that." Her voice was still calm, still reasonable, but something had changed behind her eyes, a hardness showing through the honey. He said, "We're offering you a deal. Testify against Marcus Hartwell. Tell us exactly what he told you about his plans. In exchange, we reduce the conspiracy charges." She considered. Evie could see the calculation happening, the cost-benefit analysis of throwing her lover under the bus. Delilah said, "I want full immunity." He said, "That's not on the table." She said, "Then we're done here." She stood, smoothed her skirt, looked directly at the one-way glass, right into Evie's eyes, though she couldn't possibly see her. She said, "Tell Mrs. Hartwell I'm sorry for what her husband did. Some men just can't be trusted." She walked out, her heels clicked against the concrete floor. A guard led her back to holding. Evie stood at the glass for a long time after she was gone. This woman was a monster. Beautiful and cold and calculating, she had pushed Marcus toward murder for money, and now she was going to walk away with minimal consequences, unless. Evie thought about Charlotte Vance, Delilah's mother, the phone call, her first husband. He died in a house fire, too. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to the unknown number, hit call. Charlotte answered on the second ring. She said, "Mrs. Hartwell?" Evie said, "Tell me about your daughter's first husband." A long silence. Then Charlotte began to speak. The story came out in fragments. 8 years ago, Delilah was 21, married to a man named Richard Thornberry. A nice man. Quiet. An insurance adjuster. Charlotte said, Richard wanted to leave her. He had found out things about her lies, about money she had taken from him. She said, "He told me he was scared of her. Said there was something wrong with her, something missing behind her eyes." She said, "A week later, their house caught fire. Richard didn't make it out." Evie gripped the phone. She said, "It was ruled accidental." Charlotte said, "Electrical fire. That's what the report said. But I knew, I've always known." She said, "Delilah collected $200,000 in life insurance. She didn't even pretend to grieve. Bought a new car, new clothes, started over like Richard had never existed." Evie said, "Why didn't you say anything?" A sound like a sob. Charlotte said, "She's my daughter, my only child. I wanted to believe I was wrong." She said, "I gave her an alibi for that night. I told the police she was with me. I've been carrying that lie for 8 years." She said, "And now she's done it again. To you. To your babies. I can't stay silent anymore." Evie stood in the cold hallway, processing. Delilah wasn't just Marcus's accomplice. She was the architect. She had done this before. Chosen a victim, planned a fire, collected the money. Marcus was just her latest weapon. Evie said, "I need you to tell the police everything. Everything about Richard. Everything about the alibi." Charlotte said, "I know. That's why I called." She said, "I'll testify against my own daughter. It's the only way I can live with myself." Evie ended the call, stood alone in that gray hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed above her. Something had shifted. The ground beneath her feet felt different now. She wasn't just fighting for justice for herself. She was stopping a serial killer, preventing the next victim, the next woman who would trust the wrong person. This was bigger than Marcus, bigger than their failed marriage, bigger than the $2.5 million insurance policy. This was about making sure Delilah Vance never did this to anyone ever again. Evie walked out of the police station. Her mother was waiting in the car. The twins were with a night nurse at the house. She got in, fastened her seatbelt, stared out the window at the city passing by. Her mother said, "What happened?" Evie said, "I just found out how we're going to destroy them both." 3 weeks after the fire, Evie couldn't stay at her mother's house anymore. Too many people, too many questions, too much hovering. She rented a room at the Pinewood Motor Lodge, a single-story motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where people paid cash and minded their own business. It wasn't much: a queen bed with a sunken mattress, a mini fridge that hummed too loud, curtains that didn't quite close all the way. But it was hers, a space where she could think without her mother watching, without Josie strategizing, without the constant weight of other people's expectations. She set up the twins' portable crib in the corner, lined up bottles on the dresser, made a nest of blankets on the bed. The first night was the hardest. James woke at midnight, then at 2, then at 4. Each time, she fed him in the dark, listening to the trucks rumble past on the highway. Lily was easier. She slept in 3-hour stretches, a miracle baby, her grandmother's calm temperament. At 3 a.m., both twins asleep, Evie sat in the plastic shower chair, let cold water run over her healing burns. The bandages were off now. The skin was pink and tight and new. The babies slept in their car seats on the bathroom floor, close enough that she could see them, hear them breathe. She thought about Marcus, wondered what he was doing right now. Was he sleeping soundly? Did he dream about her? Did he feel anything at all? She thought about Delilah, her perfect hair, her honey voice, the way she had looked through the glass like she could see straight through Evie's soul. She thought about Richard Thornberry, a man she had never met, a man who had died 8 years ago in a fire that should have been investigated more closely. The water turned cold. She didn't move. Starting over feels impossible. But staying in that life would have killed me, one way or another. She said the words out loud, let them echo off the tile walls, tried to make herself believe them. Eventually she got out, dried off, checked on the twins, lay down on the sunken mattress and stared at the ceiling. She must have slept, because she woke to pounding on the door. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The clock said 2:45 a.m. The pounding came again, and then his voice. Marcus said, Evie, I know you're in there, please, just let me explain. She stopped breathing. The twins stirred in their crib. She grabbed her phone, dialed 911, didn't hit send yet. He said, Evie, you're being dramatic. I would never hurt you. You know that. This is all a misunderstanding. That detective twisted everything. His voice was reasonable, calm. The voice of a man explaining away his wife's silly concerns. She had believed that voice for 6 years. He said, Come on, open the door. We can talk this through. I know you're confused right now. The trauma is playing tricks on your mind. She pressed her back against the headboard, put herself between the door and the crib. He said, The babies need their father, Evie. You can't keep them from me. That's not fair to them. His voice was changing now, the patience wearing thin, a harder edge creeping in. He said, I know your mother is filling your head with lies. She never liked me. She's been waiting for this. waiting for a chance to turn you against me. James started crying. The sound seemed to enrage Marcus. He said, "Let me in. Right now. Those are my children in there." She hit send on the 911 call. She whispered, "Someone is trying to break into my motel room. He's threatening me. I have 2 newborn babies." She gave the address, stayed on the line. Marcus was still talking. His voice had lost all pretense of calm now. He said, "You think you've won? You think you can just take everything from me? I built that life. I built it for us. And you're going to throw it all away because of what? Some pictures? Some texts?" He laughed. The sound made her skin crawl. He said, "You have nothing, Evie. No house, no money, nothing but those 2 screaming mistakes. You need me. You just don't know it yet." Screaming mistakes. That's what he called their children. She heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. Marcus heard them too. His tone shifted again, back to reason. He said, "Evie, please. This doesn't have to be so ugly. Just talk to me. We can work this out." The sirens were loud now, red and blue lights flashing through the gap in the curtains. Marcus said, "This isn't over." Then footsteps. Running. The police arrived. They found Marcus in his car, trying to start the engine. They arrested him for violating the restraining order, the one her mother had insisted she file. Evie watched through the window, watched them cuff him, put him in the back of the cruiser. He looked at her as they drove away. His face was blank, not angry, not sad, just empty. She had never really known him at all. The police took her statement, asked if she was okay. Did she need medical attention? Did she have somewhere safe to go? She said yes to all of it, meant none of it. When they left, she sat on the floor with her back against the bed. The twins were awake now, fussy but not crying. She picked them up, one in each arm, held them against her chest, and rocked back and forth on the industrial carpet. This was her life now, hiding in motel rooms, jumping at shadows, waiting for the man she had loved to try to kill her again. She thought about giving up, for just a second, letting the darkness win. But James looked up at her, those dark eyes, so like his father's, watching her, trusting her, and Lily made a sound, a small coo, almost like she was trying to comfort her mother. They needed her, these 2 tiny people who hadn't asked to be born into this mess. They needed her to be strong, so she would be. She called Josie. 3 a.m. and Josie answered on the first ring. Evie said, "I need you to come here," Josie said. "I'm already in my car." The coffee shop was neutral ground, a Starbucks and a strip mall 20 miles from town. No one knew them here. Evie sat across from Charlotte Vance, the woman who had raised a monster. Charlotte looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her hands shook around her cup. Her eyes were red and swollen. She said, "I brought everything." She slid a folder across the table. Evie opened it. Inside were documents. Police reports from 8 years ago, the investigation into Richard Thornberry's death, the fire marshal's findings, the insurance payout records, and photographs. Richard and Delilah on their wedding day. He looked kind, hopeful. He had no idea what was coming. Charlotte said, "I've been carrying this guilt for 8 years, watching my daughter walk free, watching her live her life like nothing happened." She took a shaky breath. She said, "Richard was a good man, quiet, a little boring, maybe, but he loved Delilah, really loved her, and she used him." Evie studied the fire marshal's report. Electrical fire, faulty wiring, no evidence of foul play. Charlotte said, "She knew exactly how to do it. She researched for months, practiced in the backyard, learned where to put the accelerant so it wouldn't be detected." Evie looked up. She said, "How do you know this?" Charlotte's face crumpled. She said, "I found her notes. After. Hidden in her old bedroom. I should have turned them over to the police. I should have said something, she said. But she was my daughter, my only child. I couldn't do it. She wiped her eyes. She said, and now 2 more babies almost died because of my silence. Evie felt something she didn't expect. Not anger, not sympathy exactly. Something more like recognition. A mother's love could make you do terrible things, ignore terrible truths. She understood that now. Charlotte said, I told the police I was with Delilah the night Richard died. I wasn't. I have no idea where she was. She said, I'll testify to that now. I'll tell them about the notes, about everything I should have said 8 years ago. Evie considered. This woman had enabled a killer, protected her for years, allowed her to kill again, but she was also trying to make it right. Too late for Richard, almost too late for Evie and the twins, but trying. She said, the district attorney will want to talk to you. Charlotte nodded. She said, I know. She said, there's something else, something I think you should know. Evie waited. Charlotte said, Delilah doesn't love Marcus. She never did. She said, I overheard them once, before the fire. Delilah was laughing, telling him how easy he was, how she had him wrapped around her finger. She said, Marcus thought he was using her, getting what he wanted, but really she was using him, just like she used Richard. Evie processed this. Marcus the predator had actually been prey, not that it excused anything. He had still tried to kill his family. He had still researched fires and bought gasoline and locked her inside. But it added another layer to the betrayal. He had thrown away everything for a woman who was laughing at him the whole time. Charlotte said, I think she would have killed him eventually, once she got what she wanted. He was just a tool to her. Evie thought about that. Marcus in prison, safe from Delilah's plans. He would never know how close he had come to being her next victim. Some kind of justice, maybe, a twisted kind. Charlotte pushed another document across the table. She said, Delilah's notes, the ones from Richard. I've kept them all these years. She said, I thought about destroying them 1,000 times, but I couldn't. Something wouldn't let me. She said, maybe I was waiting for this, for someone who could use them. Evie looked at the notes. Careful handwriting, lists of accelerants and burn patterns, drawings of floor plans, a timeline of Richard's schedule, evidence of premeditated murder. 8 years cold, she said. Thank you. Charlotte stood, gathered her things, paused at the door. She said, I hope you destroy her. I hope you destroy them both. She said, God forgive me, but that woman stopped being my daughter the day she killed that boy. Then she was gone. Evie sat alone with the documents. The coffee grew cold in her cup. She thought about Richard Thornberry, 23 years old when he died. No children, no grandchildren, no legacy except these notes and a mother's belated confession. She thought about her twins, their tiny faces, their whole lives stretching ahead of them. She had saved them. And now she was going to make sure no one else's children ever fell victim to Delilah Vance. She packed up the documents, drove to the district attorney's office, handed over everything. The DA looked through the folder. His eyebrows climbed higher with every page. He said, This changes things. We're not just looking at attempted murder anymore. We're looking at a pattern, a serial killer who targets husbands for insurance money. He said, we can reopen the Thornberry case. With this evidence and the mother's testimony, we can charge Delilah with first-degree murder. Evie said, and Marcus? He said, attempted murder, conspiracy, arson, insurance fraud. He's looking at 30 to life. She nodded. She said, good. She left the office, stepped out into the sunlight. The February air was cold, but the sky was impossibly blue. For the first time since the fire, something unclenched in her chest. This was happening. Justice was coming. Not just for her, for Richard, for anyone Delilah might have targeted next. She had survived, and her survival was going to save others. The weeks before the trial were almost peaceful. Evie moved into a new house. Small but safe, top-of-the-line security system, a nursery painted sunny yellow, a garden where she could plant roses like her father used to grow. The twins were thriving. James had started smiling. Lily was already trying to roll over. They had no memory of the fire, no understanding of how close they had come to dying. That was a mercy, the only one in this whole ugly mess. Josie came by every few days, brought updates on the case, helped with legal paperwork, sometimes just sat on the couch and held babies while Evie took a shower. She said one day, "You know about Marcus's father, right?" Evie shook her head. Josie said, "Theodore Hartwell has been making moves, hiring lawyers, not for Marcus, against him." Evie looked up. Josie said, "He's removing Marcus from the family trust, the Hartwell Foundation, everything. He's also planning to testify, for the prosecution." She paused. She said, "And he's set up college funds for the twins. In your name as trustee, $200,000 each." Evie didn't know what to feel about that. Theodore had never been warm to her, had always looked at her like she was somehow not quite good enough for his precious son. But he was choosing her now, choosing justice, choosing to condemn his own child for what he had done. She said, "That must be hard for him." Josie said, "He said something when he came to sign the papers." She said, "He said Marcus stopped being his son the moment he tried to murder his children. He said any man who could do that isn't a Hartwell." Evie thought about that. The steel in Theodore's voice, the grief behind it. And some things cut deeper than blood. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, even by a father. The trial began on a Monday in April. Cherry blossoms were blooming outside the courthouse. The air smelled like spring. Evie sat in the front row, her mother on one side, Josie on the other. The twins were with a trusted nurse at home. Marcus was brought in. Orange jumpsuit, handcuffs. He looked diminished somehow, smaller than she remembered. He didn't look at her, not once. Delilah was brought in separately. She had dressed carefully for court. Conservative blouse, minimal makeup, the picture of a wrongly accused innocent. She did look at Evie, a long, steady stare, no expression. Evie stared back, didn't flinch, didn't look away. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Detective Whitmore testified about the crime scene, the bolts, the accelerant, the damning receipt from the gas station. Charlotte Vance testified about her daughter, the notes, the false alibi, the pattern that stretched back 8 years. Forensic accountants testified about Marcus's debts, his embezzlement, his desperate need for that insurance money. And then it was Evie's turn. She took the stand, looked out at the courtroom, all those faces watching her, waiting to hear her story. She told them everything: the smoke alarm, the locked doors, the silver BMW driving away, the jump from the window with her babies in her arms. She told them about the hospital, Marcus's performance, his tears and protestations that had almost made her doubt herself. She told them about the motel, his pounding on the door, his threats, screaming mistakes. That's what he had called their children. Her voice didn't shake, not once. When the defense attorney tried to suggest she was exaggerating, she looked him straight in the eye. She said, "I have the scars on my hands. My children almost died. There is no exaggeration here," she said. "I loved that man for 6 years. I would have given him anything. And he tried to burn me alive for insurance money," she said. "That's not trauma talking. That's the truth." The courtroom was silent. When she stepped down, she looked at Marcus, made herself look at him. He was finally looking back. His face was twisted with something. Hatred, maybe, or fear. She felt nothing. Nothing at all. And that was its own kind of victory. The hardest part was next. Evie had one more piece of evidence. Something she hadn't told anyone about. Not Josie, not her mother, not even the police. She asked to approach the judge, handed over a flash drive. She said, 6 months ago, I found a life insurance policy I didn't remember signing. My husband told me it was routine, but something felt wrong. She said, so I installed cameras, hidden cameras, in our bedroom, in his office. I recorded everything for 6 months. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel. Marcus's lawyer shouted objections. But the videos were admissible. Evie had obtained them legally, in her own home, recording her own husband. The jury watched 6 months of evidence. Marcus and Delilah in his office, planning the fire, laughing about how Evie was too stupid to suspect. Marcus researching house fires on his laptop, taking notes, practicing his grief-stricken husband routine. Delilah pushing him to move faster, threatening to leave him if he didn't handle this soon. And the worst one, 2 days before the fire, Marcus saying, after Saturday, she'll be gone. The babies too. Fresh start. Delilah saying, make sure it looks like an accident. I don't want any loose ends like last time. Last time, Richard Thornberry. She had just died, just confessed to murder on tape. The trial ended the next day. Marcus Hartwell. Guilty on all counts. 45 years to life. Delilah Vance. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty of the first-degree murder of Richard Thornberry. Life without parole. Evie watched them being led away. Marcus in one direction, Delilah in another. Neither of them looked back at her. She walked out of the courthouse, Josie and her mother flanking her. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. She stopped at the top of the steps, turned to face them. She said, I want to say something. To every woman watching who's being gaslit, who's being told she's crazy for trusting her instincts, she said, you're not crazy. Trust yourself. Document everything, and know that you're stronger than they want you to believe. Then she walked away, into the spring sunshine, toward the rest of her life. 6 months after the trial, Evie didn't recognize her own life. The settlement from Marcus's estate had been finalized. His father had made sure she received everything that was legally hers, plus more, an unofficial compensation for what his son had done. The new house was paid off. The twins' college funds were secure. For the first time in her life, Evie didn't have to worry about money. But money wasn't what mattered anymore. What mattered was the foundation. The Lily and James Hartwell Foundation for Survivors of Domestic Violence. It had started small. A single shelter. Emergency housing for women fleeing dangerous situations. Now it was growing. Legal aid clinics, job training programs, a hotline staffed 24 hours a day. Evie spent her days in meetings, fundraisers, strategy sessions, building something that would help other women the way she had needed help. The scars on her hands had faded, just silver lines now, a map of what she had survived. She traced them sometimes, when she needed to remember how far she had come. One afternoon, a letter arrived. She recognized the handwriting. Marcus. She opened it. Read it once, her face expressionless. Evie, it said, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, please let me see the twins. They're my children. I made a mistake. A mistake. He called trying to burn his family alive a mistake. She folded the letter. Put it in the file with all the others. The weekly letters he sent, begging for contact, trying to manipulate her, even from prison. She never wrote back. She never would. The twins deserved better than a father who had tried to kill them. They would know the truth someday, when they were old enough to understand. But they would never know him, never be manipulated by him, never doubt themselves the way she had doubted herself. That was her gift to them, the only one that mattered. That evening, her mother came to dinner. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The twins napped inside. Cordelia said, "How are you really doing?" Evie considered the question, really considered it. She said, "Better, different." She said, "I used to think I needed to be married to be whole, to have the perfect house, and the perfect husband, and the perfect life." She said, "Now I know that's not true. I'm whole by myself. My children make me complete. Everything else is just extra." Her mother smiled, the first real smile Evie had seen from her in months. She said, "Your father would be proud of you." Evie felt the ache of that. Her father, gone 5 years now, he would never see his grandchildren, never know how his daughter had fought for them. But maybe somewhere he did know. She said, "I hope so." Later that night, after her mother left, Evie stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching her children sleep. James had Marcus's dark eyes. She could see that now, without flinching. The features didn't belong to Marcus anymore. They belonged to James, her son, a whole person with his own future. Lily had Evie's nose, her grandmother's calm disposition. She was already showing signs of being the stubborn one. Two perfect people, created from love, even if that love had been a lie. They would never remember the fire, never remember the man who had tried to kill them before their lives really began. They would only know the mother who saved them, the home she built for them, the life she carved out of ashes. That was enough, more than enough. Evie closed the nursery door, walked through her quiet house, checked the locks, set the alarm, old habits, the kind that kept you alive. She paused at the window. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. She thought about Marcus, locked in a cell somewhere, surrounded by concrete and regret. She thought about Delilah, in a different prison, her beauty fading, her manipulations useless against women who couldn't be charmed or threatened. She thought about herself, a year ago, pregnant and trusting and blind. She was not that woman anymore. That woman had died in the fire. What remained was harder, wiser, unafraid. I was my own warden, she thought. I kept myself in a prison of trying to see the good in someone who had none. Never again. The words hung in the silence, a promise to herself. She went to bed, slept without dreams. The next morning, she woke to sunlight and baby laughter, made breakfast, changed diapers, answered emails about the foundation. An ordinary day, the kind of ordinary that used to bore her. Now it felt like a miracle. 1 year after the fire. Evie stood in the ballroom of the Mercer Family Foundation building, the venue her grandmother had commissioned before she was born. 200 people filled the space, donors, survivors, advocates, journalists. A banner stretched across the stage, the Lily and James Hartwell Foundation, second annual benefit gala. The twins were with their nurse tonight, a year old now, walking, babbling, growing into people. Evie took the stage, looked out at all those faces. Some she knew, some she didn't. She spoke without notes, and she said, "A year ago, I woke up to my house on fire. My husband had locked me and my newborn twins inside. He planned to collect insurance money after we died." The room was silent, rapt. She said, "I survived by jumping out a second-story window with my children in my arms. I broke my ankle, burned my hands, nearly died." She held up her hands, Let them see the scars. She said, but I'm not here to tell you a story about victimhood. I'm here to tell you about power. She paused. Let the word land. She said, someone asked me once if I regret not seeing the signs sooner, if I blame myself for trusting my husband. She said, I thought about that for a long time, and here's what I learned. She said, the fault lies with the person who chose to deceive, not with the person who chose to love. My trust was a gift. He's the one who should be ashamed of what he did with it. Applause rippled through the crowd. She said, this foundation exists because I survived. But it also exists because other women might not be so lucky. Because 1 in 4 women experiences domestic violence. Because every year, thousands of women are murdered by intimate partners. She said, we can't stop every fire, but we can build escape routes. We can create safe houses and legal aid and financial support. We can help women trust their instincts instead of doubting them. She said, that's what this foundation does. That's what your donations make possible. And that's why I wake up every morning grateful to be alive. The applause was thunderous now. People standing, crying, reaching for each other. Evie stepped down from the stage. Josie was there. Her mother. The friends and allies who had helped her through the worst year of her life. A woman approached. Young. A fading bruise on her cheek. Eyes that had seen too much. She said, Mrs. Mercer, I just wanted to thank you. Your foundation helped me leave my husband last month. I don't know where I'd be without you. Evie took her hands, held them gently. She said, you saved yourself. We just helped a little. She said, what's your name? The woman said, Sarah. Evie said, Sarah. You're going to be okay. It doesn't feel like it now, but you are. The woman nodded, tears streaming. She said, how do you know? Evie smiled. The first real smile in a long time. She said, because you're still here, because you chose yourself. That's all the proof you need. Later that night, the gala winding down, Evie stepped outside for air. The gardens were lit with fairy lights. The spring air smelled like jasmine and new beginnings. Detective Whitmore found her there. He was retiring next month. Had come to the gala as a guest, not a cop. He said, that was a hell of a speech. She said, thank you for everything you did, for the investigation, for believing me. He shrugged, the way cops do when they're uncomfortable with gratitude. He said, I had a daughter once. She didn't make it out of a bad marriage. He said, helping you felt like helping her. Her, if that makes sense. Evie touched his arm, didn't say anything. Some grief was too big for words. He cleared his throat. He said, I thought you should know. Your case changed things. At the department, we're training officers differently now. Listening to women who report domestic violence. Actually listening. She said, that's good. He said, it's because of you. He walked away. Back to the party. She stayed in the garden a little longer. A car pulled up. A familiar face behind the wheel. Owen Whitaker. He owned the bookshop in town. They had met at a foundation event 3 months ago. Had coffee twice, dinner once, nothing serious, not yet. Maybe never, but maybe. He got out of the car, walked toward her, with a smile. He said, sorry I'm late. Store was busy. She said, you didn't have to come. He said, I wanted to. He handed her a book. Small, old, first edition. She looked at the cover. A book of poetry her father used to read to her, one she had mentioned once, as in passing. He had remembered. She said, thank you. He said, there's a bookmark, page 47. She opened it, found the poem, read the first line, the world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places. She looked up at him, this kind man with his kind eyes. She said, "Do you want to take a walk? The gardens are pretty at night." He said, "I like that." They walked together through the fairy lights and jasmine, talking about nothing in particular, everything and nothing. For the first time in over a year, Evie felt something like hope, not the desperate hope of before, not the hope that someone else would save her. This was different, quieter, the hope of a woman who had saved herself and knew she could do it again. She thought about the fire, about Marcus driving away, about the window shattering under her desperate hands. She had survived. She had saved her children. She had built something beautiful from the ashes. And now, walking through a garden with a man who remembered her father's favorite poems, she let herself imagine what might come next. Not a perfect life. She didn't believe in those anymore. But a good one, a real one, earned through fire and rebuilt from the ground up. The smoke alarm was quiet now, and so was she. The peaceful kind of quiet that comes after storms. The quiet of a woman who saved herself. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. Your words might help another woman who needs to hear she's not alone. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you stories like this every week. Stories of survival, stories of justice, stories that prove the truth always comes out in the end. Share this video with someone who needs hope today. You never know whose life you might change. Final statement. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team. Every story we create is crafted with purpose, designed to deliver meaningful lessons and emotional value to our audience. Thank you for being part of our community.